Friends. I'm Amy Morgan, the feature writer for the Marriage Initiative, and I am just delighted to introduce you to Steve and Susan Tucker, the founders of Eagle Family Ministries. The Tuckers have been married for 45 years. They host Making Room for Marriage retreats and can customize a conference to fit any church or organization's needs. In their book, Simple Recipes for Romance, the Tuckers explain how communication and connection fan the flames of romance as much as physical intimacy. They are certified by Life Innovations, Prepare and Enrich, Symbis, Rapport Leadership International, and Interpersonal Communication Programs. Steve and Susan, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Amy, for having us.
We're excited to visit with you.
Yes. Well, tell us how you got started into marriage ministry.
Would you like me to go first?
You go first.
Okay. Well, I was a youth pastor and for several years, and also then a minister of education. Dealt a lot with families and youth, and which of course translated into dealing with issues and family issues and marriage problems related to the teenagers and how that affected them. And so after several years, God just began to put a real burden on our heart to step out and get more involved in marriage ministry. So we struggled with that pretty intensely for about 2 years. Through some conferences that we attended, through the counsel of other friends that were praying for us and so forth, we finally came to a point in 1996 that I literally was at my office at the church, was struggling with it. And God had just said that we needed to be involved where he wanted to work, not what we wanted to do, but what he wanted us to do. And we were struggling with that decision as well in terms of knowing what that was. But I was at the church office really in prayer about this, and literally got on the floor of my office and surrendered it to the Lord and said, God, we've got to give this up, and we've got to step out and do this. So Susan and I prayed more, talked about it, and made the decision. And we had 2 young boys then as well, which was a very scary thing because the boys were what, 8 and 6.
Yeah.
And that meant stepping away from my position at church, and things were great at the church. The church was growing. No reason for me to resign my position except the fact that God said, go.
Yeah.
It's time. And so we resigned in June of 1996 at the same time that my dad was also struggling with cancer, and we knew that the result of that was not going to be good. And so he ended up passing about 2 weeks after we resigned at the church. And so we resigned the church, very emotional time for us as well as the church. And we're still at that church. This year in September marked 40 years that we've been at the church, because God didn't tell us to leave there. He just told us to step away from that position. So we stepped out, no salary, no anything except faith and God's call, and off we went.
I love that. And I love that you mention your faithful connection and membership at your church, you're still there, you're still in the community, you're still part of it, but yet you followed God. And then you chose the name Eagle Family Ministries. Why the eagle? I just love that. I think all of us, I know I can think of several times in my life recently where I've seen a bald eagle flying, and it is really a thrilling thing to watch.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Well, we chose that because of a little paperback book that we had read to our boys. It was called The Eagle Christian, and it talks about how eagles mate for life, how they work together to raise their young. And we just thought that's just such a good example God gives of how our marriage is supposed to work. We're supposed to
be committed,
work together, be
mm-hmm.
committed for life, work through whatever, and stay grounded together. So,
another interesting thing about the eagles in a relationship as well, because we talked to couples about empty nest times and preparing for that. Well, another really neat thing is that eagles, when it's time for the eaglets to begin flying, they start pulling all the soft feathers out of the nest so that the sharp sticks and the stuff forth are rough and actually cause the baby eagles, to get out of the nest and begin flying on their own. And I think what a great illustration too, in terms of the empty nest life.
Push them. Yeah.
We love our kids, and obviously we're going to have that relationship with them our entire life, but it's also our responsibility to help launch them into
Make
their
it not quite so comfortable, right?
Yeah.
No more feathers for you.
But
Maybe I should pull the pillows out of the rooms when they come visit at
there
Thanksgiving.
you go. Yeah, I don't know if that's a pretty abrupt way that the Eagles do it, but hey, it causes those eagles to fly and grow stronger. So
I love that. I love that. Well, and then you kind of start, one of the things that you had done while you were in ministry, you faithfully attended a marriage conference every year because you knew you needed to keep your own relationship strong. And you had some friends down the road, the Smalleys.
Yeah.
And so you started writing curriculum and started taking it to speak, correct?
that's correct. You want to say anything about that?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Well, we became acquainted with Gary and especially his son-in-law Roger Gibson and his wife, and they had a big impact on us, and actually a big part of our decision to leave the church and launch out in this ministry as well. A lot of encouragement and help from them as well in that situation. But we go to a marriage conference every year because it doesn't matter. And we tell this to people who attend our retreats and our conferences, is that just because we are standing up and leading a conference doesn't mean that we're perfect. It doesn't mean that we don't struggle with the same things that they struggle with in daily life. And we need that encouragement. And we call it just simply an oil change. You know, if you let that car go too long without an oil change, you are going to have problems. And that's what a marriage conference is. It's maintenance. It's an oil change. It's not because your marriage is falling apart, although it's great for couples who are experiencing challenges and opportunities in their marriage, but it's a way to hopefully help keep us from getting to that point. Yeah. And we need that refreshment. We need that challenge. And even though sometimes you hear similar things, it's still a reminder that we need to be committed to this. We need to stay with it. We all need that.
Yeah, and it just reminds you to work on different things, you know, like, oh, we hadn't been dating like we used to do, so let's get back to dating each other, or, you know, just different things. It would just remind you.
Well, you have some great recommendations, but I want to make sure that our marriage, and I want to hear about them, but I want to make sure our marriage champions know you do have the Making Room for Marriage retreats. Then you do several every year that are your specific ones, correct? And one even in Alaska, right?
Yes.
We did one in Alaska, yes, this past September. We had been up there 3 times before on different mission trips and stuff, and we kind of have connected with a younger pastor and his wife up there in Juneau, Alaska, Glacier Valley Baptist Church. So we did one at their church for their congregation. And in fact, they've talked to us a little bit since we've got back about maybe having it open to more, not just their church, have it open to the whole community next year. So we'll see.
And that's really what's exciting about that, is that even when we began the ministry, we always, because Susan lived in Alaska for
3 years when I was in elementary school,
when her dad was in the military, and we've always had a desire to go there and be a part of encouraging marriages in Alaska. But that opportunity, it took all these years. But that's the thing is that we dreamed, we prayed, and even though it took, how many years was that? 20, I don't know, 20 in terms of the ministry. Yeah. What, 24 years? 4 years? Yeah, for us to see that happen. That's why you never quit dreaming. And so now we went to Alaska 3 times just this year, and we'll be going back probably that many times next year in ministry work as well. And then we do a lot of conferences on our own. We do those in Branson, typically at the Chateau on the Lake Resort. We have one coming up November 8th through the 10th. That's going to be, it's almost here. You know, it's coming up soon. And that's a full weekend retreat from Friday to Sunday noon. Friday evening to Sunday noon.
Yeah, we start usually around 7 and go to 9:15.
Right.
And then start at 9 in the morning. And then we end at the speaking sessions at 4 on Saturday so they can have a date night, because we send out letters pre-hand telling them to plan a date, something they both would like to do. And
yeah, and then the conferences for churches, we talk to the pastor or whatever staff member is responsible for that, and we attempt to bring curriculum that meets needs that they feel like are really prevalent within their church. And so we attempt to gear that toward what they feel like is most helpful for them.
Yeah.
And so that's, that's where we come in and we do like custom conferences for churches. We don't just do a canned program, but we come in and try to, and we don't try, we do that. We work with them to make it
to fit their needs, what they're looking for.
More beneficial to their people.
Yeah.
Well, and one of the other things you had mentioned when we talked about your retreats and conferences is you have a very practical, hands-on approach with your couples. You want them to have time to practice exercises, like you said, going on a date night, doing things instead of just sitting and soaking.
Yeah.
Why don't we talk about some of the things? I know you have a book, The Recipes for Romance, and you talk about connecting. So let's talk about some of the things that you teach them, and then maybe we can go through some of you have some really neat exercises.
Sure. And one of the goals that we had when we launched the ministry, really from the beginning, is that some of the conferences that we went to were great. We really enjoyed them. We got good information, but there wasn't a time for us to work together on whatever that topic is, to come up with a plan. So what we determined was we wanted our conferences to be where it wasn't all lecture, but there's time for the couples to work on exercises. So we give them an exercise to work on after we teach the material, for them to actually come up with a plan how to implement that in their daily life in the midst of the craziness of life with the kids and work and church and sports and everything else that's going on, just life, paying the bills and taking care of everything, maintaining the home. And so what we do is we have breakout sessions and we help guide the couples through that. And it's really been exciting because we've had countless numbers of couples come to us and say, you know what, we can do this. We can do this. And a lot of times they'll even share it with the group if it's a smaller retreat on what that is, which is also an encouragement to other people for them to get ideas. And that's what's wonderful about that. But we want them to come up, like, for example, we teach the top 10 intimacy needs of marriage. So once we go through those intimacy needs, some of those are like emotional, sexual, recreational, intellectual, spiritual, just different needs. What we do is we then have each spouse to determine what they think are the top 4 needs of their spouse. Without talking about it, what do you think of the top 4 needs of the spouse? Then we have them share those answers with each other. And it's pretty neat because sometimes they get 3 or 4 of them, but
sometimes they probably don't.
But here's the difference, because we teach in our conference to be known, know your spouse, and care about what you know. So let's say, for example, your husband says to you, one of his needs is recreational. Okay. Then what we do is we say, okay, what does that mean? And we have that husband explain to the wife what he means by that, so that she has a clear, well, it means that, I'd like to go bowling once every month or whatever it is, and they actually talk about specifics related to that, and instead of just keeping it general and generic.
We'll come up with a plan.
Yes.
And then we ask them to set a time when you're going to start doing that, so that you have a clear vision of, okay, by this date, we're going to be doing this. On a regular basis.
And we have them put it in their calendar, because we tell them, if you just talk about it, you'll go back home
and life gets busy.
Right. But put it in your calendar to remind you.
Yeah.
And, so we have them talk about those specific needs. And then what we do is, after they talk about it, they learn those 4 things about each other on both sides, the husband and wife. We have both of them share what they need. What are my needs related to, if for example, it's emotional intimacy. What does that mean? What are my needs in relation? Here's what I need from you to help me in terms of those emotional needs, and I always tell them, it's not because you're needy, it's because of the way God designed you.
Yeah.
And so, for example, touch is really important to Susan, and that helps fulfill not just physical, but an emotional need.
Yeah.
Where for me, it's not as big of a need. So
Yeah.
I had to learn to be able to how to express touch because I came from a family that didn't do that. I had to learn how to do that to meet that need in her life. And that doesn't mean that she's needy. It just means that that's important to her.
Yeah, you're just built differently, and you can meet it. Now, I love when say your 3 statements again, because I want to go back to one of them, but I want to make sure our marriage champions have those.
It's to be known, know your spouse, and then care about what you know.
Well, and that was something for you all when you talk about how God made you in different family backgrounds with your different families of origin. You know, Steve, you had lived in the same place for all your life and everyone knew you and loved you, but Susan had moved a lot and had developed some coping strategies so that being known was very hard for you, right?
Right. It was very hard for me because other than the 3 years that we spent in Alaska, we usually moved every 18 months. So I would just, and I'm a little bit introverted, so I would just be making friends when we would move. And I got to the place probably right, around 5th or 6th grade where, and I can remember in my mind thinking this, okay, this is it. I'm going to not let anybody in to really know me, because then you move and then it's hard to start all over again. So I had done that. So whenever Steve and I met in college, that was one thing that he really worked on, was trying to pull out so that I would share things with him so that he could know me.
And for me, it was a lot easier simply because I'd had the same friends. I graduated high school with the same kids I started first grade with.
Yeah.
I'd never moved once in my life. My parents had their farm for 45 years. So going to college was my first move. And so now I will say this, she had a hard time being known and sharing her fears, her dreams, her goals, her wants, her, all of that. She had a hard time being vulnerable, was really difficult for you. For me, the second one of those is be known, know your spouse. The knowing part was the hardest part for me because I was more the talker. And so when she would start sharing something, I was bad about going over the top of her and finishing, putting the period on her sentence.
Yeah.
And then she would say,
"That's not what I was trying to tell you."
And then I would always say, okay, well, what was it?
And I said, "It doesn't matter now."
I bet so many of our marriage champions who are watching this are laughing themselves, saying, okay, we've had that conversation.
Yeah.
But she finally, at the age of 52, after you'd been married for decades.
Yeah. And been working on that a long time.
Right. I learned to zip it up and listen.
But she shared something very important with you at that point. And I would love you to tell our marriage champions, because it is just right something of my heart. So I love the story.
Okay. Well, I'll start when I was 47. My family, my dad died young and has a history of heart disease, diabetes, and that's on my mother's side too. And so at 47, I thought I need to start taking better care of myself. So I started exercising, getting up real early in the morning, which was real interesting for Steve. He said, "I don't know why you want to get up," but I'd get up at 4 o'clock or between 4 and 4:30, depending on the day of the week. And I would do my Bible study and then hit the gym at 5 o'clock.
Now, let me say this. I had to learn, because to be known, know your spouse, right? So she started sharing this with me.
Yeah, I was going to.
Before I would have said, now I did say, I don't know if God's awake at 4 o'clock in the morning.
I agree. I don't think he is.
No, that's not true. Yeah. I was just joking with her. But before, I would have said something like, okay, right. Yeah, well, okay, we'll see how long that lasts. But because we had worked on know your spouse, I didn't do that.
No, he said,
I was encouraged.
He said, "Please try not to wake me when you leave."
Yeah.
And I said, "I'll do my best." So then I started working out, started cleaning up my diet, which Steve thought he was going to die at first, because I went to cooking more healthy because we used to eat a lot of fried foods and all kind of cut that stuff out.
Farm food.
Farm food, yeah. Anyway, and then when I was 52 and I was in better shape, I remembered something that I really enjoyed as a young child. And one place we lived, I got to participate on a track team for the school year that we were there. And it was something I really enjoyed. So I told Steve, I said, I'd like to start running and maybe enter some races, not to win the race, but just to have that goal to be in there. So I said, I want to do a half marathon. So I started out with a half marathon. So Steve sweetly took me to the running store here to get some shoes.
Do you mind if I talk about that a second?
I know you want to.
So the third thing, be known, know your spouse. The third thing, I don't know if you remember or not, but it's care about what you know.
Yeah.
So the first two, know your spouse and be known and know your spouse, really don't mean a lot if you don't do number three, right? You've got to show that you care. So I thought, okay, I'm going to show that I care. And I had went and bought her some cute little running outfits, and she still looks good in them, you know. And I thought she needs some good shoes, right? Yeah. So we're going to go to the running store here in Bentonville, Arkansas, and we're going to get you some. We're going to have them put you on the treadmill. And I'm thinking, you know, I grew up as a country boy, and I'm thinking, you know, for $65, we can get some nice shoes. And I have a history of being known as a nickname of Tightwad Tucker.
And he earned very
well. I'm not as bad
but not
anymore.
as young.
And I thought, we're going to go to the store and I'm going to buy her these shoes.
Triple that.
One thing I noticed when we were there, I thought, they don't have price tags on any of these shoes. If you've ever been to a running store, you've probably noticed. You have been, and you noticed.
Oh, yeah.
They don't put prices on them. We get up to the checkout with the shoes, perfect shoes for her feet. And the young man says, that'll be $158. And I'm like, what? I didn't say what. I'm thinking to myself, care about what I know, care about what I know, care about what I know. And so verbally I said, okay, yeah, that's fine. Then I find out that all running shoes cost that much or more.
And now that she's been running marathons and qualified for Boston, what do you do? How do you care about what you know now too?
Well, when she came to me and said she wanted to go do a marathon in Phoenix, Arizona, and the whole purpose of that marathon was in an attempt. She said, you know what, if I'm going to do this, and she had worked really hard to diet and exercise. She had lost 50 pounds. Wow. And was looking great, doing great. And she said, I want to go to Phoenix and race and attempt to qualify, because you have to qualify for the Boston.
Yes.
And qualify for the Boston Marathon. So I said, okay. The Tightwad Tucker, I did my best to not kick in. And I said, you know what, we'll budget, we'll plan.
I gave you time
and
to save up.
We'll do that. And so we went there and she ran the race. And what I do is I get the race route and determine where I can get on that route. I try to get there within every couple of miles. And that's where I hold up my signs to encourage her. So when she comes by, I'm out there. When I first started doing that, it scared me because she's actually pretty fast. And I was afraid. I thought, what if she's already ran by and I'm standing out here with a sign?
Yeah.
So I had to learn how to pace her. Now, good thing about it, some of these marathons have the tracking app, so I can keep up with where she's at.
That's handy.
Yeah. And like Chicago, I can keep up where she's at and determine where I may have to take the L train or whatever to get someplace. But I get out there and stand on the side of the road and scream and yell and holler and encourage her to give her that little boost along the way.
And it does. It gives me a boost.
Yeah. And to me, that's a way that I can show that I care, yes. That I support her and I'm in this. And consequently, she beat the qualifying time by like almost 20 minutes and she qualified for the Boston Marathon. And of course, I'm all excited. Then I think, oh, wait a minute. That means plane tickets and hotels and food. No.
We're going to Boston.
Yeah, I said, we're going to Boston. And so we went to Boston, and when she ran the Boston Marathon, its security is very high. Yeah. So I was only able to get in one location on that. Two locations on that. But I was taking the train out to where I was going to get off out of the city to get off and get on the racetrack so I could cheer for her. And on the app, you know, I'm on the train. She, of course, had to take the buses up to the starting gate and so forth. And the app comes up and says, Susan Tucker just crossed the starting line.
Oh,
And I'm sitting there and I started crying, you know, and all these people are looking at me like, what is he do? Why is this man crying? But I was just so proud of her, you know, for what she's accomplished and how hard she's worked. And then I got, you know, so that was pretty emotional. You
that
know?
is so sweet. Oh, that is so sweet. I just think that is such an inspiration for our marriage champions watching, and that connection and that communication. And you guys are glowing. I'm glowing from the reflection. If you're glowing, that's, oh, I love that. Now, of course, in 45 years, you've probably had some conflict.
Oh.
Maybe when the tightwad Tucker
No, never. We do marriage conferences. We wouldn't have a conflict.
You guys teach your couples at your retreats this really wonderful technique. In fact, I made my husband read. I didn't make him. I was like, honey, can I read my article to you? And I like read this part to him. I'm like, isn't that a great technique? So could you go over how you teach your couples at your conferences, just a really creative and positive way to engage in conflict to have a healthy outcome?
Yes.
Yeah, it's called play ball.
Mm-hmm. And we got this from a good
Roger
friend,
Gibson.
Roger Gibson, Gary Smalley's son-in-law, is who actually came up with this and allowed us to take it and run with it. And it's really a neat concept. We like games, right? And most of the time when people deal with conflict, it's scary, right? I mean, because what we've discovered at our marriage conferences, when we get to our session, when we're going to talk about conflict, I always ask the question, how many of y'all have a plan on how you're going to handle your conflict? And I don't believe this is an exaggeration at all. About 95% of those couples cannot raise their hand. Most couples have never established a plan of how to handle conflict. Therefore, it's scary. Emotions get out of control. A lot of times escalation takes place. Hurtful words are said because there's no rules, right? There's no boundaries. We don't have boundaries set for how we're going to handle conflict. And that's where play ball came in. And we have boundaries and we have rules on that. And what it is, and let me say this too, play ball is not to fix it.
Yeah.
Play ball is not about the solution. Play ball is about understanding.
Yeah.
And what happens a lot of times, because to fix it, we go to what's called green light thinking. But what we've discovered is many times once understanding take place, that's all that's needed. They just need to understand where the other one's coming from, the hurt or the fear or the anxiety, or, you know, and it can be from our upbringing, you know, from years past of how conflict was handled. So play ball is this. Let's say that Susan and I have a little conflict. And let's just say that she comes to me and she says, hey, you feel like playing ball? Which means you feel like talking about the conflict. And we actually have an actual soft little
It's a stress ball.
And it's got on it, play ball, our Eagle Family Ministries, play ball. And I may say to her, I don't really feel like playing ball right now. Now, usually it's going to drive me crazy because then I'm thinking, what have I done? Or what kind of a trouble am I in? Or whatever. So finally I make, and here's the thing. If you're really not at a place emotionally where you are ready to do it, don't, but set a time where you are going to come back. And so I might say to her, hey, you know what? Actually, I'm in the midst of this. Can you give me an hour?
Yeah.
And then let's talk about it.
That's fair.
Yeah. And so an hour comes back and she has the ball.
Okay. And then so I tell him what my concern is. And I do it in just little short sentences so that he can take, just little pieces so he can get the whole thing.
Yeah. He can process it without a lot of words.
Right. So I'll say one little thing and then I'll hand him the ball.
Yep. So I've got the ball. And the thing is that the person with the ball is the speaker.
That starts with the ball.
Which means the person without the ball is the listener. Mm-hmm. So she hands me the ball. What would I be at that point?
Well, you told me that you're still the listener. I
You
would have
got
said
it.
you're the speaker now, but nope, you're still the listener.
Because you don't change roles until understanding takes place. So, and here's the other important thing about this. Many times what was said is not what the other one heard.
Right.
And be honest about that. So she might say something to me, and when she hands me the ball, all I can do, I can't give my opinion, I can't give my fix it, I can't give my ideas. All I can do is say back to her in her own words, am I hearing you say yada, 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 yada? And she may say,
No, that's not what I was saying.
and then I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's what I heard. So what did you say? And then she'd say it again. Now, here's the other thing about play ball. No negative body language. You can't sit there with your arms crossed, rolling your eyes. You know what I'm saying? We communicate a lot through our body language. None of that. That's not allowed during play ball. So she takes the ball back from me.
Mm-hmm. And I say, I feel like he understood, I say, and I also da 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 da.
I take the ball back and I said, okay, so you're saying that. And I say back to her what I'm hearing. She takes it back and she goes, yes. And so I said, okay, is it okay to share my side of it now?
And I say, yeah, I feel like you understand what my
And then I become
fear
the
is or whatever.
speaker.
Yeah.
Now, here's the thing. When you have this ball and you're passing, you can't grab the ball and take it away from the other.
You want to sometimes.
No stealing.
No, when you don't have the ball, there is no speaking. You cannot talk unless you have the ball in your hand, which forces me, especially as a guy, forces me to listen. Because guess what? I got to say back what she just said to me. Because what happens a lot of time in conflict is when she's telling me something or I'm telling her something, it goes both ways.
Yeah.
We're really coming up with our defense, not listening. We're sitting there thinking, well, I'll just tell you what I think about that. You know? And we're really not listening. We're just coming up with how we're going to defend ourselves. Okay. So then I get to share my side of the story. Do you want us to share a quick thing, a real true story on one of ours?
Sure. I like that one. Yes.
Make it quick. But
all right. You want to do?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Our favorite one.
The one
that we still work on.
That we still work on.
Okay. I would come up and say, you want to play ball? Steve said yes. And so then I'll say, I have noticed, and it concerns me, that you are driving too close to the cars in front of us.
She hands me the ball. And here's what I said to her in real life, when we were in this. Oh, so you're saying I'm a terrible driver. Now, is that what she said?
No.
No, she didn't.
And I'll say, no, that's not what I said. I said, it makes me uncomfortable when we get close to the cars in front of us.
Well, then I've got to stop and think a minute. I say, okay, because I'm going to follow what? I'm going to follow the rules. And I say, okay, so and I still may not like it, but I got to do it. And I'll say, okay, so you're telling me that you think I'm tailgating and driving too close to the cars in front of us.
I think you're following too closely. I don't know if I'd use the word tailgating, but I think you're following too closely.
Did you have any more to say about that?
Yes, and it would make me more comfortable if we wouldn't follow so closely.
And then I've understood. I understood what she was coming. Now, obviously, we're doing this quick and took longer than this in real life. But so I say to her, I said, well, you realize, and I think I said this to you. I said, well, you realize that some people just need some godly encouragement to move along.
To get down the road.
Yeah. Because yellow doesn't mean slam on your brakes. It means go. No. But I shared with her my thoughts about that, and we worked through it, and so I truly understood that it really was seriously, it really was scaring her.
Yeah.
And because I value her, and because I love her and I respect her, even though sometimes
you really like to tailgate.
I'm still going to what? I'm going to work on changing because I'm doing it for her. And so you want to tell them what we came. Then we went to green light thinking.
Right. And that's the important thing too, is the transition then to the green light thinking.
Uh-huh. And what we did is we both wrote down on paper ideas on how we could solve this.
Yeah, and we encourage couples to do that separately.
Mhm.
And you don't have to green light think immediately. You might come back in the next day or two and talk
Yeah.
about that. Main thing now is the anger level's down, the emotions are lowered because we've come to what? An understanding. Okay. And we can move on and enjoy our day or evening after that. And sometimes we do green light think right away.
Yeah.
But in this case, we thought let's go back. So we encourage couples to do this separately. We both wrote down our ideas of what that would be. That's what green light thinking is. Then we came back and we shared our ideas with each other. The next thing on that is to, once you share the idea, then you have to eliminate, if one of you says, you know what, not being difficult, but that absolutely is not a solution.
It's not an option.
We have to eliminate that off the list, and that topic can't be brought up again.
Yeah.
Okay. It's off the table. And then we simply just agree, okay, this is what we're going to do. And that's what we did. And that doesn't take long. And in this case, with the tailgating, you can tell them what
what we came up with is that because Steve didn't want me to verbally speak anything because he felt like I was calling him out when I would speak, probably because my voice was getting higher because I was hurt. But anyway, I think you're too close.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what I do, what we agreed to, he agreed he wouldn't get mad, is I reach over and gently squeeze on his knee to let him know that I'm feeling uncomfortable with the distance between the car in front of us.
And my agreement was when she did that, I would just simply look at her and nod and so, and I'll back off. And that way there's not any verbal things going on where I feel like she's my mother or she's,
Your driver's ed teacher.
Yeah, my driver's ed teacher. But I agreed to that. I won't get mad. And I actually asked her in our discussion of play ball after we got done with that and went into green light thinking, I did ask her, do I have to drive this way when you're not with me? Because that's a legitimate question, right?
It is. It is.
And your answer was?
You can decide what you want to do, but I would prefer that you always backed off a little bit.
And so I have. And so I seriously, even when I'm alone, I pay it. And you know why? Because I value her more than something that I want. So,
and you all are so lovely and so much fun to chat with. If you could just, I love it. And you have given us so much to think about. If you could give us a 1-minute summary of what you're doing with the Wilmot mission, because we would be remiss if we didn't mention that, because that's been such a part of your ministry for 25 years. So just a quick summary. What is the Wilmot mission and what do you do?
Okay. Well, when we began our marriage ministry, we did say that we would like to have a mission in addition to the marriage ministry. We had no idea what that was, when it would come or anything. And one day we were sitting in church and a lady got up and made an announcement about an area in poverty in Southeast Arkansas, referred to as the Mississippi Delta region in Southeast Arkansas. And there was a town there and the children couldn't even get pencils or school supplies. So our church was going to start collecting school supplies for those kids. Well, Susan and I were in church that day and we went out and got in the car and it was, the Lord just spoke to both of us.
Yeah.
Literally at the same time.
Yeah.
Because I looked at her and I said, what did you think about the announcement about the school supplies?
And I said, I think there needs to be more than just school supplies. I think that God has something more planned for this little town.
We said, maybe God
We had to look up on the map. We'd never heard of it, even though we live in Arkansas.
And our oldest son had won the state baseball tournament and we were going to be going to Meridian, Mississippi for a baseball tournament.
Regional.
You weren't able to go on that trip, but for a regional baseball tournament. So I told my son, I said, you know what? On the way to Mississippi, we're going to go find this little town called Wilmot, Arkansas. We're going to pray over it and we're going to see if God has something there. And he puts a calling on our heart. So we went there, we prayed over the town, went to the baseball tournament, came home and could not put it down. We just could not put it down. So to make a long story short, because I can talk a long time about this, but now the very next summer, we went down and did some Bible camps, sports camps, some construction projects, and started doing Christmas for all the children in the elementary school, where we bought every child Christmas that year. And we've continued to do that now all these years. We're in the process right now of buying Christmas for all the children.
Fifth grade and below.
Yeah. Pre-K up through 5th grade is what we do. And an interesting thing about that, we also ended up buying land. We bought 2/3 of a city block. We built a food pantry on that property. And here's an interesting thing that this shows how God works. Where my son and I stopped and prayed,
That's
if you look out the driver's side window of the car toward the lot on the left side of the car, the sidewalk to our food pantry is right there. Our building is that lot. The very place we stopped and prayed is where God gave us, and God gave us that.
Yeah.
We had people donate and pay for that land and pay for the building. And just yesterday, we had a semi-truckload of food delivered to that building that's going to service 400 families. And so we still go down. This summer, we went down to sports camps. We take about 8,000 to 10,000 clothing items down a year, have clothing giveaways. We went down and had a big night back to school thing where we rented from a company in Louisiana. They brought in all of the wet inflatables and had in the big inflatables and cookout and all this stuff for the children to have a blast. And so it's grown into, and it's just grown into a pretty good size ministry.
wow.
And we love the people there. They're just family to us in that community. They're like family to us. God has broken down some of the racial barriers, or a lot of the racial barriers that were there. We've seen about 125 to 150 people saved.
And a lot of the kids that are now grown have got out of there, gone to college, or got some kind of trade training and are working, which is breaking the cycle of them being stuck in that poverty.
And we've had universities come down and give meetings to how to apply for scholarships, how to get help for college and grants and all that.
And take the ACT. We sent some kids to the ACT camp at the University of Arkansas. So,
and one of those girls is the one that we stopped at a McDonald's on the way back from a trip in Monticello, Arkansas. And I heard a cute little voice saying, "Mr. Steve, Mr. Steve." And I walked on, I said, "Oh my gosh, what are you doing?" She was working there at the McDonald's. And she goes, "I'm graduating with my nurse's degree this year." And she was one of our babies.
Yeah.
In Wilmot.
So,
and when we started that, what the Lord told us was, it's not a one and done. If we're going to do this, we're going to commit to long term. We want to impact generations.
And you have, and it's been 25 years of your faithfulness.
24 years this year.
Well, Steve and Susan, you are just so delightful and so fun to talk to. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having us.
It's been so nice meeting you and visiting with you.
Oh, absolutely.
We're all in this together.
Yeah.
So.
That's right.
For the same goal.
That's right. And Marriage Champions, if you'd like to learn more about Tuckers and the Eagle Family Ministries or their Wilmot Project, you can find us at marriageinitiative.org or marriageresources.org.